I want to start with one of the quotes of Bart Ehrman at the University of North Carolina, who's got this Lost Christianities, the battles for Scripture and the faiths we never knew. Here's what he says, then Darrell, I'd like you to unscramble this. Their view is the early Christian church was a chaos of contending beliefs. So you got all these different various beliefs. Some groups of Christians claimed there was not one God, but 2 or 12 or even 30 gods. This is the Gnostic view, and you'll have to explain that in a minute. Some believe that the world had not been created by God, but by a lesser ignorant deity. We talked about that in a couple programs, but mention it again. Certain sects maintained that Jesus was human, but not divine, while others said he was divine, but not human. And the fact is, the scholars are saying, this is what's out there, they got hard evidence for it. You're saying that's wrong. Unscramble that for us.
Well, the idea that of early Christianity being in chaos depends on really what period you're talking about. Are we talking about AD 50 when Paul's writing? Are we talking about the middle of the 2nd century or the end of the 2nd century when these groups are starting to spring up and are creating enough of a stir that there are people writing huge tomes in response to them because obviously they are drawing some attention? If he's talking about the late 2nd century, then that statement has an element of truth to it. But if he's talking about the earliest period, it really is way off. Another problem with the statement is the idea that there's this human Jesus with no divinity attached to him. Bart Ehrman, when he makes this claim, is doing it through the idea that just like you have the Gospel of Thomas that doesn't have a divine Jesus, and we've already shown that there are problems with that, there also is the tradition in the Gospels, the teaching that Matthew and Luke share, which is often called Q material, that also doesn't have a divine Jesus, but he's managed to leave out another important passage. And unfortunately for Bart, there is the temptation of Jesus, which is a part of the Q material, where Satan comes and confronts Jesus as the Son of God.
All right, this Q material. People are saying, what in the world is Q material?
Q material is teaching material that Matthew and Luke share, and the belief is that it was one of these traditional sources of Jesus' teaching, because the argument is Matthew and Luke didn't use each other, but they obviously have about 200 verses between them that they share. Where did it come from? It must have come from
And that's
an early
not
church
unbelievable
source.
because Luke himself says he knew about many sources
Exactly
in Luke chapter
right.
1, verse 1.
Exactly right. And even if it isn't a Q source, even if he's got it from Matthew or Luke's or Matthew's got it from Luke or vice versa, it still is the case that you have this material that Ehrman is claiming comes from Q, and that Q never discusses the divinity of Jesus. And yet
Why do they use the letter Q?
It means source. That's what most people think.
Q from quell.
Quell for the German word.
Okay, so they're saying you had this source. Keep going.
So he's wrong on suggesting that the early period was terribly chaotic. I mean, the chaos in the 1st century wasn't with these views about multiple gods, etc. The chaos in the 1st century was with the reaction of Judaism. He's wrong with regard to the suggestion that the sources that we have, the earliest sources that we have, suggest that there's a human Jesus. We don't have any text anywhere, any source strand anywhere in all our materials that has just a human Jesus. When someone embraces Jesus, they either view him as human and divine or exclusively divine.